Thank you all for coming. We've got a really, let's quiet down. We have a really wonderful panel today to talk about the state of documentary film and nonfiction programming. To my left, I have Cara Cusumano, who's the festival director of Tribeca and the SVP of programming. I have Sylvia Bugg, who is the Chief Programming Executive and GM of General Audience Programming at PBS. I have Carrie Lozano, who is the President and CEO of ITVS. I have Dan O'Mara, who is the EVP of Nonfiction at Neon. And I have Carol Martesko-Fenster, who is CEO and President of Abramorama. So, thank you. So let's start with you, Cara. About how many documentaries does Tribeca typically showcase each year?
Just over 50 features, but across all formats too.
And about how many submissions do you have?
We have over 13,000 submissions.
Wow.
For feature documentaries specifically, it's probably 2,000 of those.
And of those, how many arrive with distribution?
Of the submissions, not...
Sorry, of the ones that you accept.
I see. About half and half, I'd say. Maybe slightly favored towards films without distribution.
And are you finding that the films that come without distribution, are they getting distribution typically? What's the experience right now?
I think they are. I think it's taking longer than it used to. You know, I've been at Tribeca for 19 years, and when we first started, I think like many festivals, the model to kind of bring a completed film to market at a festival, sell it during the festival dates was very common. And I think that's become less common. But I do think if you look at the calendar year following a festival, similar numbers of films are ultimately finding distribution. I can't speak to what those deals are or if the kind of parameters have changed, but we are still seeing distribution come out of the festival for sure.
Have you seen any kind of drop-off in the number of submissions? I mean, that's a large number of submissions, so have you noticed anything like that?
Submissions have gone up every year in the history of the festival.
And Sylvia, why don't you talk a little bit about what role documentaries and nonfiction programming play at PBS? I mean, how much?
Sure.
Yeah.
Happy to. One of the key areas of our mission is really focused on telling those stories that come from a wide range of perspectives, of viewpoints, geographic reference. And so we work very closely with organizations like ITVS that distributes Independent Lens and other public media organizations that are committed to telling stories from a wide range of creators and storytellers, and storytelling, I think, is at the heart of what public media strives and aims to do, and working, of course, with our local PBS member stations. So many great stories and filmmakers are in those communities that we want to reach, and so it's very vital for PBS and just continuing to do this work in this moment.
And do you do documentary films or primarily nonfiction programming? How do you kind of distinguish?
It's really a mix and a range because we have so many of our public media partners that will work on features, that will work on other formats. And so we've tried to be, really open to finding ways to create a mix of different formats and types and kinds of stories, which I think, again, are so important in this moment.
And Carrie, I wonder if I'm not sure, I think most people have probably seen programming that ITVS is involved with, but I'm not sure they know what ITVS is. So I wonder if you could explain a little bit about your mission and the work that you do, too.
Sure, thanks. And we were just talking about an ITVS filmmaker, Raoul Peck. Public media and ITVS were really the early champions of I'm Not Your Negro. That's where that film started. Dan Krause, who has been on the stage a couple times, his first feature was also a public media film. So we're often at the beginning of people's careers or early in their careers, and so we can list them off. But what ITVS does is we co-produce with independent filmmakers, mostly feature films, but also a significant number of shorts for PBS distribution, and our mandate is that distribution is very wide. We have our series, as Sylvia said, Independent Lens, But our films also go to POV or American Masters. Sometimes there's a collaboration with Frontline or Voces, or sometimes we're working together on a series like American Historia, John Leguizamo, things like that. So we were a piece of legislation. I mean, this is going to seem totally inconceivable right now, but in the late 80s, we were a piece of legislation that Congress passed that said the Corporation for Public Broadcasting must start an independent television service, thus the name, that works entirely with independents so that we can provide innovation, diversity, and underserved storytelling to the American public. And that's what we've been doing for 35 years. And producing over 900 feature films. And again, really at the launch of a lot of careers where people go on to do fiction. And, I think of Pete Nix, other, folks like that. And we intend to stay in business despite everything that is happening. Our doors will remain open thanks to our distribution partner, who is also going to stay in business.
We are open for business. We're still here.
So we're here to say that. That is the headline.
Yeah.
Well, I want to drill into that a little bit, too. What is going to be the impact of the funding that's going away, the federal funding that's going away?
I mean, Sylvia can talk about the PBS piece of it. For us, historically, it has been 86%. Because we're a legislative mandate, it was 86% of our funding. Now, we saw the writing on the wall, for reasons I won't get into here, well before the election, and started to shore up our reserves and to make some really challenging decisions. Even recently, Sylvia was saying, are you still doing your filmmaker summit? We're not doing a filmmaker summit. We didn't do a second open call. We recently let go of 10 films, and for those of you who've worked with ITVS, it's a significant investment in their films financially. And there were 10 films that, had been vetted, had gone through the whole process, and we had to let go of them at this moment. So the impact, we will make it, and we have a lot of supporters who are coming to the table, and, we will get through, and we'll probably be a different organization on the other side. But in terms of the impact, it's really on the independents. And, there are many of you in this space. That's where it's going to hurt in the short term.
Yeah, and I would only add, I think, from where we sit, in addition to the work that Carrie and her team do with filmmakers such as yourself, who's in the room, is our local stations, because the funding cuts impact our local stations. So that is an area also that we are thinking about at PBS, because there are many filmmakers locally who are doing great projects in their communities. Those are not flyover stories. Those are rooted in community. And so in all of this, the impact is significant. However, I think to Carrie's point with creativity, innovation, having all of you all continue to tell great stories and not forget the power of community. And that's what local PBS stations and PBS are really about in terms of trying to meet the mission.
Have you found donations, has giving gone up at all in life?
It's interesting that you asked that, and I think in moments like this, it has been heartening to see that surge, if you will. And I think the key, though, is figuring out ways to keep that energy going. That's going to be really important, and that is on us and working with our partners to think about innovative ways beyond direct fundraising donations, philanthropic support. Carrie's been on the front lines of that, and other leaders throughout our organizations. And so we're optimistic, but we also want to make sure that these kinds of stories continue to stay in the spotlight. And we know that needs support in order to do that.
I would imagine that a lot of projects, it takes so long to make movies, it takes so long to make programming. Maybe the impact isn't felt immediately. So, when will people start to notice what happened?
We were talking about that too. We've been catching up a lot in the green room. So because we have to work so far out for a number of different reasons, some of it's related to the funding that we need to do, thinking about a distribution strategy. And one of the things I think for public media and PBS Films especially is the engagement. And that's something that Independent Lens and those of you who work with ITVS know is also at the heart of the work. It's what do you do with those films that you produce? They are distributed, but they're also used for local community engagement, taking the conversation beyond just the film, the education piece. And so it's not immediately felt, but I think having 2 to 3 years worth of content pipeline that's already built up will be important, and that's where we're aiming and what we already have. So our schedules and pipelines are quite full. That gives us a little bit of time. So we may see some of that impact in terms of being able to greenlight as quickly, but that's where I think the important conversations are had with producers, with our partners at ITVS and others throughout public media. What would that funding model look like? What do we need to do? Where do we need to activate? And let's get to work.
Absolutely. So, Dan and Carol, you are part of this ecosystem in a different way. Why don't you talk a little bit about what documentaries mean to both of your businesses and how you, how many films do you distribute? How many documentaries are you typically involved with? Dan, maybe you go first, and then Carol.
Yeah. Well, documentaries have been a big part of Neon's identity, our business, from the very beginning. I think our second and third releases were Risk by Laura Poitras and The B-Side by Errol Morris. We went on to have a lot of success in the early years of the company with Three Identical Strangers, Apollo 11, Honeyland, Biggest Little Farm, Amazing Grace, Flea, films like Fire of Love, All the Beauty and the Bloodshed. I'm just thinking a bunch of and these every year that we have 2 or 3 documentaries that we have in release, so they have been a big part of who we are, and that has a lot to do with Tom Quinn and his history with documentary, and he brought that along with everybody else who works there. This is just foreign language films, documentaries, genre movies. They make up sort of the identity of what Neon is. We wouldn't on any given year try and look for a certain number of films. It's just what strikes us and what's available and what we think we can make work in cinemas.
And are most of these acquisitions?
Yes, most of them. In the early days, it was almost entirely acquisitions, and then in recent years, we started producing and financing or say, pre-buying, getting involved in an earlier stage with some of our nonfiction films.
What about for you, Carol?
First of all, it's nice to be here. Nice to be amongst all of you, too. Thanks. Well, I'd probably start by saying we're a little bit of an unusual animal because we are a distributor. We distribute about 25 to 35 films a year. Majority of those are documentaries. But we are what's called a service distributor. So we work on behalf of clients. We don't acquire rights, but we acquire a certain amount of time that we work with our clients. And the clients can be individual filmmakers, philanthropists, HBO, Amazon, anybody that's looking to put a film into a theater and to elevate the awareness around the story. We have frequently films that actually are Netflix acquisitions. The filmmakers will come to us, and we do the theatrical lift for the film and work with the filmmakers to handle all the aspects, the PR, the marketing, this, that, and the other thing. So we, in this ecosphere of distribution, we're providing a service that is getting busier and busier. We're also one of 2 companies that distributes films anywhere on the planet, except for North Korea. We recently distributed a film in China. But I think the biggest thing is that we work with the IP holders. And in this day and age, a lot of times the standard acquisitions are not something that the filmmakers really want to accept because it ties up their films for a long time. So they'll find ways to underwrite and finance the release. And those can be small releases, they can be big releases. But we are big screen focused. And then we provide a lot of sort of guidance for the IP owners and what we call the multimodality of the release environment. In other words, theatrical on demand, direct-to-audience VOD, partner VOD, broad VOD, all these various things that are happening. And we work a lot with ITVS filmmakers. We don't make curatorial decisions around the films, but we tend to primarily focus on quality documentaries.
Have you found that you're getting kind of more incoming requests right now as the distribution landscape has shifted a fair amount?
Yes, I would say that over the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen a tremendous increase in films, but it's not just because of the changing environment of the amount of money that filmmakers can get from acquirers, but it's that filmmakers are understanding that there are all these tools at their disposal that they can utilize, whether it's on the marketing, promotion, the distribution. And we've been saying that we're entering an era of direct-to-audience distribution, which is really starting to take hold. So a lot of these filmmakers and IP holders come to us more now than ever before, who are saying, hey, how can we do that front end of the theatrical, create the awareness and the elevation for our films so that we can then make some money on all the ancillary outlets.
And what is the value of a theatrical release for a documentary right now? Is it mostly to raise profile? What are people?
A concrete example. Last year we had 6 films that were Netflix acquisitions. Those 6 films, one of them was a global Netflix acquisition, and as some of you might know, if you're an acquisition, most of those companies will not spend a dime on PR or marketing because it's really a subscription feed. So the filmmakers come to us to do that theatrical, which is where we feel is, you get that coverage, not necessarily reviews, but coverage, whether it's on blogs, on podcasts, paper, television, wherever you want. But you get that coverage to elevate the awareness of the film. And with our 2 main types of documentaries, social issue films and music docs, it's extremely important because filmmakers have made stories that need to be told and that are usually around some strong subject matter. So if you can't elevate that, and if it's on a platform that's not going to do anything other than feed the system, it doesn't really do anything for your film.
Don't you have the theatrical release for Oscar consideration as well?
We do sometimes have that, and we will but we don't. We don't really. We used to have films that came to us just for that. But at this juncture, the mechanics of qualifying a film for an Academy Award are very, very simple. And you can do that on your own. You don't need a company to do that. But what we try to do is we try to structure releases and engineer releases so that Academy qualification and sometimes the 4-year consideration campaign is tied in. For example, tomorrow a film is opening at the Quad Checkpoint Zoo, which we're releasing that's going to be, it's qualified for an Academy Award, and it will be in contention, and all the bookings that we have in October and November and December double as 4-year consideration bookings. But that's not a primary thing that we do.
It wasn't that long ago where you had some documentaries that were making like over $10 million in the theatrical box office, like RBG. 3 Identical Strangers did too, I think, right? Around that. Yeah. I mean, what are the grosses that you're seeing on a documentary now? Like, what's success theatrically?
Well, there was that year, 20. I think that was 2018 or 2019. That was the summer of the documentaries. Won't You Be My Neighbor, RBG, Free Solo, and 3 Identical Strangers, and a lot of those films were trailering on one another, and it was there was Movie Pass, it was a virtuous cycle.
Yeah.
And there were other films that year, Maiden, Echo in the Canyon, that were also grossing multiple millions of dollars. And there was a time, pre-COVID, where it wasn't uncommon for a documentary to get to $1 million or more. It became less common after COVID and remains so. There are still things happening. In 25, we've seen the Led Zeppelin documentary, which was over 10. We saw No Other Land, which was 2.5, I think.
And that was self-distributed, right?
Self-distributed. Yeah. There are bright spots. But they're less. They're less. It's less frequent that documentaries are grossing over $1 million theatrically, and we're putting out Orwell on October 3rd. It's a different environment than it was pre-COVID. I think that audiences got into the habit of watching documentaries at home during COVID. The older audience that was coming out to see specialty films became very acquainted with their streaming services during COVID, and were like, "Oh, I love these movies. I want more of them. I'm going to watch more of them at home." And so it's harder to get them back into the habit of coming into theaters. But I don't want to say it's only going to take one. It's going to take multiple to get audiences back into that habit. But, we remain optimistic that can happen.
I guess just to open it up to all five of you, what do you see as the biggest challenges that documentary filmmakers are facing right now?
Money. The budgets have grown, as we all know, especially during COVID. And there's not a correction. As we know, when something gets more expensive, it kind of stays that way. It's settling a little bit, but because there's a distribution challenge, I'll say it that way, those that would invest historically are a little more skittish. And then funds have contracted across the board. This is our concern because a lot of ITVS films, it's like people don't necessarily know it, but it hits all sides of the industry, actually. And what I'm most concerned about is if something happens, say, to ITVS's funds and the big investments that it makes it harder for the Sundances to come in and the others to come in, which hits Neon. When I was at Sundance, we supported many of the films you listed, Fire of Love and others. And so the ecosystem is actually much more tied than people realize, both in the kind of commercial space and then in the what I would call the nonprofit space. And so we all sink or swim together, but really getting some big billionaires to come and invest $100 million in our ecosystem would go a really long way. We know how to stretch a dollar. And that would support the entire ecosystem, including theatrical, including the academy, all of it. We are very, very interconnected.
What do other people think are the big challenges? Anything other than just
I think one of the biggest challenges for documentary filmmakers is adoption. They have to adopt and adapt the technology and the systems that are at your disposal. Because if you look around, distributing a documentary in a traditional format in a theater and then on a broadcast or something like that is a good thing to do. But you need to look at some of the other platforms and things that are out there where you can get films to an audience and actually also make money. That's something that, we've gotten very used to those days, 2019 and prior, when there was a lot of money being spent and there was a lot of money flowing around, and that was the way the business worked. But if you look closely, some of the young, I have a daughter who's 23. She knows how to operate TikTok and Instagram. She's making a tremendous living as an influencer doing that. She figured out how to operate the system. In the theatrical world and in the non-theatrical and in the digital world, you can operate, but you have to adopt those technologies that are at your disposal. That's one of the biggest things, that we don't have a lot of people who how many people in this room know what direct-to-audience VOD is? Raise their hands. VOD. So that's good. 2 years ago, no one would have known what that is. Who knows what theatrical on demand is? Okay, that's good. It's a few people. So there's a bunch of different ways that you can get films out there. Making money is not easy, and it usually starts with an audience. So one of the things that we always tell filmmakers when they come to it, the first question that we ask, do you have an audience or do you have support organizations? Because that is going to be the key to getting people to come out to the theater.
In my experience, the challenge at the moment is that producers, directors, everybody in the ecosystem got accustomed to, over the last 5-6 years, being able to rely on financing, distribution, license fees, P&A spends, all of it at a certain level, because there was a moment where all the streamers were competing with one another, and it was creating a marketplace that was very robust, and people were able to sell their films and get hired to work on films at budget levels where they were able to build entire businesses, careers, lifestyles around fees from documentary films. And that turned out to be something of a bubble.
You're talking about when they were going for like 15 million, 20 million?
As recently as even, 2020, 21, at the start of COVID, where there was this buying frenzy. All the streamers were buying up documentaries because they weren't sure how long COVID was going to last. And so, films were going for multiple millions of dollars, and people became accustomed to the idea that it was sort of like housing prices, like they're never gonna go down. This is what this is now. And now it is leveled off, and we've sort of returned to the environment that we were in I don't know, 2017, 2018. It's challenging. It's always going to be challenging. It always was. And so sort of reorienting ourselves as professionals working in nonfiction to what the truth of the market is now is going to be challenging for a lot of folks, because they went into this with a certain expectation that they would be able to make their films for, it used to be that $1 million to make a documentary was a ton of money, and now we're pitched things all the time where the idea of doing it for less than $1.5 or $2 million is just absurd. And when did that happen? It happened in the last 5 years. And so, producers are going to have to get comfortable with the idea that these budgets need to come down.
Why do you think the budgets are so high? Like, is it, in a way, I would think technology would be able to
because the market was permitting the budgets to be that high. The streamers were paying so much money that the agents got involved. Everybody started bidding these things up, and prices went up, so the budgets went up.
And do you feel like, for all of you, I mean, did the audience go away, or like, why was there this correction? Is there still the same audience that there was when those prices were sky high? Is it just the streamers ended up having different corporate philosophies and there was some sort of spillover effect? What kind of happened?
From my point of view, one of the things is, first of all, if anybody remembers how Netflix started, similar to what you were saying, Dan, it was documentaries. And they had somebody named Lisa Nishimura who actually was there, who put a lot of money into acquiring films and acquiring documentaries. They spent a lot of money. Those were single film acquisitions. Most SVODs are episodic based. So buying a single film for them is a challenge because it requires an attorney, it requires a team to deal with one thing, as opposed to, a 15 episodic series that really is what they want. They're all about subscriptions. I mean, I think that's clear to everybody. And they built their business, a lot of them, on documentaries. But it's just very hard for them. It's understandable. Like, if you buy a documentary, it's one thing, you're dealing with one piece of IP. It's hard.
And I would just go back to the question that you asked us originally about biggest challenge. I agree with all of the panelists, and money especially in public media, but also the makers and creators. How do we find ways to attract younger, emerging, first-time filmmakers? I've often heard, I need to get my first film done, but the second film is also going to be very hard to find the money. But we have tried to create, programs and just other ways that we can build that pipeline. But that's something that I think connects to your daughter and how she's been able to really make a living and thrive. And so part of, our jobs is also to think about that generation of filmmakers who do know how to be scrappy and do more in terms of technology and advancing ideas around ways to get their films done. So the people part of it.
On the question of audience, from the point of view of the festival, it's interesting because we're seeing some of our biggest audiences ever in the history of the festival, not even just kind of since pre-COVID. So it's really interesting to hear, this sort of feedback on panels and directly from filmmakers with a lot of frequency and from the industry, and then walk into a theater at Tribeca and we've sold out, 5 screenings for a foreign language black and white, documentary. And I think, so it's proof that to me that the audiences are very much there, and why that maybe isn't translating to a wider release is not an audience-based question. But I also think that the festival and festivals in general can hopefully speak to this question of adaptability that you're talking about with how films are made, how they're seen, how they connect with audiences, because we can provide this sort of playground space to try out new ideas, try out new formats. Tribeca in particular, I think, is known for being platform agnostic. We have podcasts, we have social media creators, and that finding the best route to connect with an audience can be different depending on what the project is, and maybe that's a place that a festival can serve a purpose because the barrier of entry is a little lower. You're not investing in a huge nationwide global release of something to see if an idea works. You can try it out on a smaller scale.
Yeah, I think that, counterintuitively, documentaries have been the victim of their own success in the sense that they proliferated so much, they became ubiquitous. They're being watched now more by more people more widely than ever before. And yet, that created there was a moment where they were rare, and there was a moment where there was a greater demand for them, and now the streaming services have realized that these individual films are not valuable to them the way that they once were as awards prospects, as their transactional value to the streaming services is just not what they were. And they know that their audiences expect documentaries to be available on streaming services, like an infinite menu of them, but no one wants to pay for them. It's sort of like songs that way, At some point, people stopped wanting to pay for music, and that may have happened with documentaries, and so we have to work that much harder to make them feel like experiences, and both in the making of them and the releasing of them, to make them feel rare and to create something that has value to audiences, and then ultimately that'll, I think, that value will go into the greater market.
They prefer docu-series? Because I noticed that a lot of these are much longer than they need to be.
True crime.
Yeah, true crime.
Celebrities.
There's been a lot written about kind of the lack of interest in political or sort of social justice documentaries right now. Why do you think that is the case?
Money.
Money.
Yeah. If you look and see who's behind certain companies and what they do, it's money.
I mean, this is why public media matters so much,
Yes,
because we're not
exactly.
driven by money.
Exactly.
We don't have a profit motive. We're mission driven. And for those of us who've been making films, we were just talking about, making films, say, 25 years ago. Today is much like it was kind of 25 years ago. It's always been hard because at its core, so many of these films, they're not really about profit. They're not commercial in nature. And so that moment where the kind of nonprofit realities of these films met the commercial possibilities, I always felt like it was a bubble. It just didn't seem like it could last. But public media is a place where actually you do get the largest audience for these types of films, and they're accessible to people throughout the country. I mean, the number of people that I have met that are so random, a Latino veteran who lived in rural Virginia at an event, retired, so probably in his 60s or so. And I said, what's your favorite documentary? Love documentaries. Well, I love Ken Burns, but you know what? My favorite film, I'm Not Your Negro. And I was like, that's our film. We did that film, and these people do want to watch, they do care, but the profit motive, the model has never been, it's kind of like any sort of fine art, right? And that's why the public support mattered so much.
I mean, is there also just
the political environment also? I mean, these big, large companies that are, traded companies, a lot of them, they're not immune to what's going on in the country and interests. And you're not going to have certain streamers showing films like Invisible Nation when they deal with Taiwan, for example, and you have Chinese. I mean, there's just so many complex things. At the same time, though, I just want to say something just real quick, because for me personally, I've been around for a while, and in the late 80s, we kind of had a similar situation, and that happened to spark some of the most prolific filmmakers and most amazing storytellers. So when I look at the current time that's difficult, it's actually also a massive opportunity. Massive opportunity. And we need the storytellers. And the only thing I will say, if you're making a film and you don't allocate at least 25% for a marketing and distribution budget, you better stop. That's it.
Yeah, let's end on a positive note. What are the opportunities?
Can you repeat that?
What are the opportunities? It's obviously it's a very disruptive time. There's a lot of really big challenges, and we've talked about them. But what are the opportunities that are out there for documentary filmmakers?
I would just say, public media, PBS, the organizations that we work with, Independent Lens, the National Multicultural Alliance, Frontline, there are just so many avenues. And I think the opportunity is just we work and aim to create those safe spaces where you can have conversations about ideas that you have, and they're not bound by profit and money, but we want to come in and just have a conversation about what your goals are for a particular project on a number of different fronts, and they have to align. I mean, I think partnerships are successful if we're bringing something to the table of value. And so that's why I appreciate so much the work that Carrie and her team are doing, because they are really out on the front lines working with filmmakers to find those stories, many untold, undertold stories that should be out to audiences.
Yeah, and I think the technological piece of this, it is complicated. It's not like it's going to solve everything, but we've actually had some successes on YouTube. You know, a film will have its broadcast. It'll have a limited YouTube, free and accessible engagement. And it is amazing to watch the level of engagement on some films. It doesn't work for everything, and we're learning so much about what works and why and how you kind of kick to those films. But when it works, it's incredible. It's incredible. And so I think filmmakers opening their minds to what is possible and being in a position to try things, it is a moment, again, like the 80s and the 90s, where you could try things and do it your own way, depending on the story. And I think that's the other thing. It's always about the story. And what does the story demand? And where do you want it to go? And not all stories are created equal. They're not for everybody. But really understanding who you want to reach and all the various ways that you can do it, that is very, very possible. And that's exciting. And we are fully on board to continue to do that work together.
Well, will you join me in thanking our amazing panelists? Thanks.